GCOM Election Media Center this evening, or from the comfort of your home or wherever you are. Indeed, it has been quite a long day, I'm sure, for you members of the media on the ground covering these elections. Has been quite a remarkable experience. So today across the country, the Guyana Elections Commission conducted general and regional elections. For us, the voting process has proceeded smoothly and peacefully across the country. Where issues have arisen, they have been addressed promptly and transparently in accordance with the law. We remain concerned about the ongoing spread of misinformation and wish to provide clarity on some of the most common areas of confusion without naming or highlighting specific individuals or sources. The first issue I wish to touch on is the issue as it relates to Commonwealth ID cards issued to Bangladeshi nationals. I want to particularly emphasize that GCOM confirms that under Guyana's laws, Commonwealth citizens residing legally in the country for over 1 year are eligible to vote. The ID cards issued reflect the legal residency status and are valid for electoral purposes. May I pause here to emphasize that under the National Registration Act, where the electoral process actually begins from the point of registration, the eligibility for registration is that you must be a Guyanese citizen by birth, descent, naturalization, or a citizen of a Commonwealth country living in Guyana for 1 year or more. Once you are eligible and you have been registered, as you're fully aware, your information or your record is entered into the National Register of Registrants database, and at the time of an election, you are extracted onto an official list of electors. May I emphasize again that that is what the law provides for. It therefore means that once your name has been extracted onto an official list of electors, you are eligible to vote. The second thing I wish to raise in relation to matters circulating on social media today is as it relates to multiple nationals at one address. GCOM does not control living arrangements. In some cases, employees or agencies house temporary or contracted workers at single location. What matters is that the registration process was followed in compliance with the law. And I've explained this at point 1 as it relates to Commonwealth citizens. Throughout the day, we have seen the issue of the voting compartment facing inwards or outwards. As a matter of policy, and GCOM instructions are that voting compartments must be positioned to preserve voter secrecy. If any deviations were identified, presiding officers were empowered to immediately rectify them. I want to particularly note that where these matters were brought to the attention of our operations team, they were immediately addressed to the satisfaction of the candidates and agents at those respective polling stations. There was a matter as it relates to no ID card on polling day. Again, let me reiterate the legal provisions in relation to this. Persons without their ID card can still vote once their name is on the official list of electors. It is important to note that in such case, there is a procedure that must be followed. In such a case, they must answer security questions and may be required to sign an oath. This is in keeping with the Representation of the People Act. Another issue that confronted us throughout the day was a matter of name not found on the list, but persons claim to have voted before. The only valid reference is the official list of electors for this election. If a name is not on the list at a given polling station, that person cannot vote at that polling station. We have throughout all our public engagements prior to the conduct of these elections urged voters to always verify their registration details well in advance and of course knowing the polling station. To further supplement the process, we had information clerks placed across the country, particularly at polling places with several polling stations. We've received reports as well as it relates to police officers being stationed inside of polling stations. From us at GCOM, police officers are stationed outside of polling places unless their assistance is specifically requested by the presiding officer. This is consistent with electoral law and established protocol. Again, where these concerns were brought to us, they were immediately addressed. The big issue also that confronted us today was the concern of names of deceased persons seen on the list. Specifically, I point out here fouls and more. Names can only be removed from an official with an official death certificate submitted to the General Register's office. Without it, names may remain until the next list revision cycle. This is a legal safeguard to prevent wrongful removal. We have discussed this matter as it relates to the removal of deceased persons from the list, the process that GCOM, the legal process that GCOM engages in relation to how that is done, where we receive death returns from the General Register's office, and these flagging are done in accordance with the legal provision, or during the claims and objections period, where persons are permitted to make those objections. Of course, as you know, and we have published the multiple safeguards in place at polling stations to guard against any possible impersonation. There were some concerns as it relates to slow voting process at some stations. The feedback we've received from polling stations across the country was that the process was progressing smoothly and in accordance with GCOM's procedures. I want to particularly note that while minor delays may have occurred during peak periods, but all systems remain effectively functioning. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now at the point where I presume, if not all, most of our polling stations are probably closed and at the count. I'm saying probably because there is a provision in place that while the poll closes or should close at 6 p.m., that if there are electors in the line, it is the responsibility of the presiding officer to count the number of persons in the line, ask the police officer at that particular station to stand behind the last person and ensure that all those persons are attended to in accordance with that provision. I'm sure currently in the respective areas, statements of poll, where possible, where counts have been concluded, are probably en route toward the respective, whether deputy supernumerary returning officers or to the returning officers of the respective district. If you check on GCOM's website, that statements of poll gallery is already live, and so as those statements are delivered, you as well as the members of the public can access that gallery from very comfort of their home and examine those statements of poll. This action is in accordance with the legal provision as amended by the Representation of the People Act, Act number 25 of 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, I pause here to say that throughout the day, generally from us at GCOM, barring the minor hiccups that we faced and adequately addressed, it has been a smooth day, and we look forward to the other operational procedures that will now take precedence in the next few hours. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite you to ask any questions or raise any concerns you may have. And of course, I know you've been in the field all day, and you may have a few for us here. I see many hands in this corner. Can somebody help us with a microphone, please? Kindly state your name and the media house you represent, and we'll take no more than 2 questions per person at a time.
Thank you very much, Dr. HGP. I think it's more you and the Chief Elections Officer, even the Deputy Elections Officer, you keep talking about this rigorous process to probably avoid voter impersonation and so forth. And I want to specifically take you to what you mentioned about the wrongful removal from the list, specifically dead persons. What if, just if, GCOM finds that the dead have voted?
Travis, we've addressed that particular issue at length. Again, I want to take to the safeguards that we have in place. Operationally, we've done our part, and while these are allegations, again, GCOM does not have that investigative authority, but we've done what has been mandated of us to ensure that we have those legal procedures followed and implemented at the place of poll. Ms. Fowler? Thomas.
Marcel Thomas, the Government. You spoke about the minor hiccups that you have had today, but I didn't hear address that the website had crashed, and this has been a problem throughout the day. Your GCOM officers themselves were frustrated at some of the polling stations. GCOM had given an assurance that it can handle the website traffic, and it was asked this question: what happened? That's one. And recommendations for the provision of services for disabled persons were made since 2020. There we had complaints, and we saw firsthand some persons could not access polling places, some persons with disabilities. Again, what happened? That's my question.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. I will start with the latter, and of course, rightfully so, to really apologize to the members of the disability community. I'm very cognizant that this is an issue that we continue to face. But again, what we are required to do legally in the operationalization or the placement of electors to polling stations within their respective divisions and subdivisions. And so in such a case, it mandates that unfortunately sometimes members of the disability community may be placed at a polling station that unavoidably does not have provisions such as ramps for them to access. What we've done is to ensure that we ask presiding officers as much as possible to offer the kind of assistance necessary to help those persons to cast their ballot. In relation to your first question, I'm fully aware of the issue of the up and down period of the website, particularly the query tool for the Finding Your Polling Station app. While we've experienced those issues, I think that our IT team was working on that round the clock to ensure that they put the necessary fixes in place and ensure that the system was live, up and running within the shortest possible time. We have continuously, throughout the day, and even now that we have launched that SOP gallery portal on our website, continue to ensure that we reassess and continue to monitor that website closely to avoid any possible such occurrence during the course of the night.
Marshall, news source, an issue of power outages. We're seeing reports of power outages in various regions. Could you say how many polling stations have been affected by power outage and what are the implications for such? Marcel asked about visibility, because everyone asked that, but we also received reports today about missing ballots, the wrong ballots being sent to polling station. I think Montrose with among communities listed. Could you address that? Is that true or not? And if so, what would have led to that?
All right, thank you very much for those questions, Svetlana. As it relates to the power outage situation, up to the time when I commenced this press briefing, I had not received such reports. However, what I can say is that we have put backup systems in place to address that. In addition to that, for the purpose of the count, we have provided all polling stations with solar lamps to facilitate that process. But in the cases where at the offices of the returning officers and supernumerary returning officers, there are backup systems in place to ensure that that upload and scanning process of those SOPs continue uninterrupted. I think your second question had to do with a mix-up of ballots at Montrose. I am not aware of the issue, but for me, once the ballot has not been issued and it has been recognized at the respective polling station, then I believe that it will not have any implication on the process.
Just a follow-up, could it have resulted in persons not, if short ballots, ballot papers were issued to that particular station, would it have affected maybe the numbers of
Right. I don't think it would ideally affect the polling station in relation to a shortage of ballots. There are provisions in place to address any such occurrence, but we've not received any such report. So as of this point, I believe that it's safe to say that voting proceeded very well at that location you're referring to, even though we've not received that kind of report.
Can you shed some light on this purposeful incident? Did you get any report from the chief of staff there?
So we have not received through the official channel a report. I have seen the circulation of a video on social media in relation to an incident at the Safai Primary School. It is a matter that I will not want to address at this point in time without having all the facts in place. I'm sure at one of our follow-up press conferences, when we have further details on that matter, we will be able to adequately address
You
it.
refer to an incident. There appear to be several incidents at that polling place. The one you referred to that's circulating, and another late this afternoon about half an hour before the close of polls, when there was announced between the same parties, some claiming that persons were being offered contracts at the polling places, and others claiming that A.N. agents were frustrating the process. And A.N. agents claiming that people were offering contracts to voters.
Right. Well, again, Abina, we have not officially received those reports from our team, and therefore I would not want to prematurely offer any comment on such a matter without having all the details on that. At the follow-up press conference, I'm sure we'll have some more details for you in relation to that.
I know you may not be able to give us a figure, but can you say, based on what you've been hearing from your colleagues, what has been the vote turnout like in terms of whether it was steady, slow, or any other description you feel is appropriate? And secondly, can you say why no proper testing was done of the permit tools to avoid a crash of the website? This probably could have been avoided, some experts say, with the relevant testing and the purchasing of the necessary capacity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cabral. I like to deal with numbers. And so to prematurely tell you about turnout will be really a hit and miss. Our observation, what might work for you may not work for us, but from a GCOM standpoint, as the electoral management body, I prefer for us to look at numbers before we make such a pronouncement on turnout. As it relates to the query tool, I see present with us in the room this evening, we have the Information Technology Advisor from the UNDP, who has been offering support to GCOM in relation to its IT needs. And we've done a considerable amount of testing on the portal. And even now, as I mentioned, we continue to ensure that we monitor it closely. I think in the IT world, once some of these systems are crowded at a particular time, we may very well experience this kind of hiccup, and hence that's why we've been urging persons way in advance to ensure that they use that tool to check their polling station. Again, it is unfortunate, but I think the work that was done by our technical team to ensure throughout the day that that did not remain for a long period is commendable, and that they've been able to quickly resolve those matters.
Ms. Warren, I'm going to take you back to the inability of some people who are different people to hear to talk to. And I'm saying this because I was at a polling station where I saw this firsthand. You spoke about the presiding officer being the person who would have been able to handle such things properly. It did not happen, at least on the two incidents where I saw what happened. In fact, it seemed as though your people were looking for higher authority to commit them to allow these differently abled people to vote. That's one. Would you comment on that? What is the process employed there? And at my polling station, the polls opened pretty late. In fact, the gate to the outer building was opened at 6:20. At 6:30, two of the polling booths were ready and working, but the rest of them did not operate on time or did not effectively open just after, let's say, the opening of the gate. And you did have people waiting there. But on the other hand, you did not have the time back, which I knew was in place for late opening when poll stations open late. There is a time back that is given to the voters. I know you're going to tell me about people being in the line at the close of poll, but I saw at least two people going into that specific polling station and being told that they closed at 6:50.
Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, Ms. Johnson. Let me address the first issue again as it relates to dealing with persons with disabilities. GCOM has continuously been engaging I think it's the National Commission on Persons with Disabilities. And of course, we continue to receive recommendations in that regard. One of the issues that we face there, Julio, is the fact that these things, a lot of what may be required, needs legislation. And outside of that, we may not be able to implement some of those recommendations. Again, it's quite unfortunate that the training that our staff were given was probably not adhered to at those specific polling stations, because on the other hand, I've seen images, even witnessed at some polling stations today, presiding officers facilitating persons with disabilities. I don't know if those issues were resolved and those persons were able to eventually cast their ballots, but I would hope that that has happened, that whether the presiding officer then sought the guidance of their respective DROs and they were able to properly execute that task, that would be my hope that that has happened. As it relates to the late opening of the polling station, I am happy to report that maybe that was maybe a very small percentage where that may have happened. Again, I am not sure what might have been the issue that contributed to the late opening of poll. But in relation to the matter that the poll closed at 1 minute to 6, that is of concern to us, and I hope that you may be able to help us with that information in relation to that polling station. And this is something that we may have to look at, because legally the poll closes at 6, and every minute counts in relation to that.
Samuel and CMUs. Ms. Ward, have there been any major challenges with persons utilizing the folio passport and the folio note?
We have not recorded any challenges. This is a legal provision in the amendment of the Representation of the People Act that caters now for persons to vote with a valid passport and a valid driver's license. Even outside of any form of identification, a voter, once they're listed on that official list of electors, they can vote without an ID card, without any form of identification, because there is a system in place to identify that voter. And as you rightly mentioned, the provision of the folio, to do that, it is what is the procedure, and I have not received any complaints and should not have any complaints in any voter being able to cast their ballot because they didn't have a form of identification. Of course, an oath of identity is administered to that person before they're allowed to proceed to cast their ballot. I see a question over here.
Hi, good night. Fiona Morrison. I'm seeing on Facebook tonight some activists posting what appears to be copies of statements from polls and coming to their own conclusion. What is your appeal to the general public and the college in terms of them awaiting credible and official results?
Right. We have issued several appeals in relation to this matter. And again, for us at GCOM, I want to remind persons that GCOM is the only authority to release the election results. If you've noticed, we've even stayed away from preliminary results. And so I want to urge persons, and as you've mentioned, political parties, to desist from doing that. We want to ask persons in particular to rely on the tool that is legally provided for by way of GCOM's website to ensure that they follow from that tool and so that they're not misguided by what is published out there. So it is important for persons, particularly the electorate as a whole, to be only guided by what GCOM publishes in relation to any kind of results from these elections.
Hi, good night. Tamika Garnet from the Guyana Times. My first question is pertaining to a picture that was circulating of national cyclist or former national cyclist Alonzo Greaves posting a picture of his ballot. Would you be, I don't know if that's authentic, so you can confirm whether or not that was actually authentic. And would you say that GCOM did enough to prevent voters from taking their cell phones into the polling station, especially in light of the fact that we saw defiant voters during the discipline services voting, going in with their phones and taking pictures of their ballots? My next question is, we've seen a lot of reports circulating online of persons saying they went to vote, didn't have an ID card and turned away, or they had conflicts with the presiding officers. At least one person was saying that they went to vote but was told that their name was ticked already. I don't know how authentic or not authentic some of these things are, because of course fake news is common. But can you say what is the reporting mechanism or feedback mechanism that GCOM has available to citizens who would have encountered some issues at their polling station, what is the process for them to report to GCOM what happened with them at their polling station and what is the next step going forward after that? If I say something happened that prevented me, a valid citizen, from voting, how can I report this to GCOM and what is the next step for me?
Thank you, Tamika. As it relates to your first question, again, GCOM does not have the requisite or has not been mandated with investigative capacity. And therefore, as it relates to the ballot circulating on Facebook, while it is alleged that it belonged to a certain person, GCOM does not know that. And therefore, anything as it relates to investigating the origin of that photograph lies in the hands of the police. You've also followed on with that question as it relates to whether GCOM has done enough to put the mechanism into motion as it relates to not allowing persons to enter the polling station with their phones on, off, whatever. I'm sure that as you traverse today, you would have noticed signs at the respective polling stations. And even prior to that, several notices by way of social media or in the newspapers, and even via your coverage as it relates to this matter. I have seen the placement of desks next to voting compartments for persons to leave their phones there. But we've seen, of course, the one issue. What I am happy about is that that issue has not been a widespread issue. And therefore, I believe that the message was clear and persons have really taken the opportunity to follow those procedures that we've placed in line. As it relates to the other question, as it relates to a feedback mechanism, you rightly started off that question as it relates to misinformation and disinformation. And so I will leave it right there to particularly note that we have to be very careful when we receive these reports, and therefore I'm sure that as citizens, if they have such concerns, then is always willing to listen and hear what those concerns were. But again, we have to be very careful with the level of misinformation and disinformation that are peddled in the public domain. Are there other questions?
Marshall, resource, sorry. But yes, following up on Tamika's question, would GCOM be requesting formally for the police to launch an investigation into the illegal acts of having those ballots photographed, or you're going to leave it open for them to make the first jump at the investigation? My second question has to do with the chairman of the Elections Commission. We noticed her statement last night. I don't know if anyone in the room saw her for the day, but could you brief us on her visits, where she was able to visit, her engagement with electors and things like that? I haven't seen her. I don't know about the other reporters, but I haven't seen her. And would she be engaging journalists at this crucial point?
Okay. Can you repeat the first question for me, Santana?
With regards to the ballots and having those photographed illegally by voters, we've seen at least 2 or 3 cases today. Would GCOM be formally writing to the police requesting that investigation launch into these illegal acts to have persons prosecuted? or it would be up to the police to launch an investigation?
All right. I can properly respond to the course of action at the next press briefing because, of course, I do not know the direction in which the Commission will handle this particular matter. And so until I'm guided by what the next steps are in relation to that, only then I'll be able to say whether GCOM will formally write to the police or whether the police will take the necessary actions on their own.
And the chairman?
So I'm sure that at some point that the chairman will engage the media. Of course, you know that for the purpose of the declaration, that is a mandate that falls under the commission. I've been engaged for the entire day, of course, distributing ballots for intermixing. That's the disciplined forces ballots, and therefore I do not have a record as to where the chairman may have visited. I'm sure that she was out and about somewhere, but I'm sure that sometime throughout this period you may be able to have an engagement.
I'm just following up to the question of the chairman, and I have a substantive question. Could you say where the chairman was today?
I'm unable to provide that information.
But you know that she was somewhere.
Right.
Okay. My substantive question is, as we come to the end of this press conference here, one, is this the final press conference for today? And as it relates to final results, is it still the fourth as projected?
Okay. I think more than likely I should say this is likely to be our final press conference for this evening. As you know, we will have operations continuously ongoing, and therefore we would want to be engaged in those operations. But as I mentioned, the statement of poll gallery is live on our website, and therefore you can follow that gallery online during the course of the evening. But of course, if anything urgent arises, therefore, and we need to address that, it's more than likely that we can have one of this. I do not anticipate anything of that magnitude happening that will require us meeting in this space. But of course, this media center is open on a 24-hour basis, and therefore, you're all welcome to stay, and you're all welcome to follow our website in relation to those SOPs. So, more than likely, our next press conference will be scheduled for sometime tomorrow.
Ms. Ward, Travis Chase, you said you were involved in the intermixing of the disciplinary services balloting today?
Well, the dispatch of.
You were dispatched. You were also the logistical officer at GD?
No, Mr. Chase.
So isn't that the work of the logistical officer? Explain to me how that works, please.
Mr. Chase, these ballots are dispatched across the country, and therefore it requires the support of all in our operations to ensure that it is done in a timely and efficient manner, of course in the presence of political party agents and on the police escort, to ensure that we cover all the gazetted polling stations where those ballots were expected to be intermixed.
So here I come again. Was GCOM able to find those missing discipline services ballots today? That's one. Two, we spoke to the young lady on the other side of the room about the statements of poll being available on social media, but there's nothing that GCOM can do because those are posted, and if people take them and post them, if it's not an illegal act, as I am aware, would you say whether or not The results we were told yesterday in Chicago were on the 4th, and you did not definitively answer a short while ago to Marcel. So I'm asking you again, thanks.
Julia, you're really trying to pin me down on that. And I don't want to be very malicious at this point in a very sense to say that the law permits us 15 days. But of course, as always, we understand the anxiety, and we've committed to delivering those results within the shortest possible time. And of course, taking into account all the legal provisions that are in place. When I say legal provisions, as it relates to the request for recounts, if there are requests for recounts and we have to facilitate those recounts, then it means it may shift those anticipated timeline. But of course, we want to ensure that this process concludes within the shortest time possible. Julia, as it relates to your question, as it relates to the statement of goal, I know when the young lady asked a question, she was particularly referring to a particular statement of goal. And I've just received a statement from the Chief Election Officer in relation to that particular statement of goal. And so, while it will be shared with this statement, will be shared with you after this press conference, I will take the liberty of reading this statement. It says, GCOM rejects the publication of fake statement of poll. The Guyana Elections Commission has noted the publication of poll at 1 minute past the scheduled close of poll. GCOM wishes to make it abundantly clear that it is impossible for the counting of the ballots at any polling station to have commenced. This despicable act can only be seen as creating a platform on which the political party associated with Team Mohammed's Facebook page can create the impression that it has been successful at the polls. GCOM takes the opportunity once again to appeal to all stakeholders to accept only the results of the elections that are posted on GCOM's website in the form of statements of poll. 2, the official declarations made by the supernumerary returning officers and returning officers for the district and sub-districts respectively, and the national results to be declared by GCOM. The publication of fake results will be put to the Guyana Police Force for investigation. I will share this statement with you after this briefing.
Thank you, but you didn't answer the question on the discipline services ballot.
Sure. Thanks for the reminder, Julia. Again, I am not sure at the time of this press briefing what is happening operationally. Those ballots will either be detected during the process of the count, and so there is a system in place already to ensure that as soon as it is detected, that it arrives in the respective region to ensure that it is counted in that particular district. So that process, I'm sure, as it unfolds during the count, that we will be able to identify those ballots.
Ms. Ward, can you say what is the procedure from the time of the creation receives the poll to uploading? Could you run us through the process for GCOM, that is?
Right. So Deputy returning officers, they are responsible for clusters of polling stations. And so, once they respective packages from the respective polling stations, the office of the supernumerary returning officer for the respective, or the returning officer for the respective district. Thereafter, the process will commence for the uploading of all those SOPs to the GCOM website. And once all the SOPs have been uploaded, it is only at that point the tabulation process will commence.
Do you know when the first SOPs will be uploaded based on what you just said?
I'm unable to tell you that. That is an operation that is ongoing in the field, and I will not have that information here at this point.
But what about for the least populated areas? Would it be easier for these to be done in a timely manner compared to the densely populated areas of the country?
Right. So it may not always be about the population, but it has to also do with the terrain. And so while the population in a particular area may be very small, we also have to consider the terrain. And so again, those are other factors that we should also consider. What I can say to you then is, our will be working around the clock. There's no stop. And therefore, sometime throughout tonight, I'm sure you can expect SOPs being uploaded to that portal.
With regards to the missing, the ballots that have not been accounted for, if those ballots are discovered tonight, hopefully they are, would the DCO be in a position to transport them to the respective regions?
It must be done.
Or
it must be done.
Pertaining to my earlier question about the mechanism for feedback, if a person, a citizen has a grievance or a question or a concern about what happened to them, I don't think I clearly understand how the voter is supposed to contact GCOM. Is there a hotline? Is there a section on the website? Where do I go as a voter who was aggrieved in my voting process? Where do I go at GCOM to lodge my report?
So we have the various layers. The supernumerary returning officers, chief election officer. So either of those persons can ensure that. Again, Tamika, when you asked that question, it was with that note of misinformation. That was indeed the case, and those persons were able to cast their ballots today.
my final question has to do, I figured that the DCO was listening to this press conference if he's the person responding to the fake SOP. Now, why was it that he quickly responded to that and said that GCOM would request that a police investigation be launched into those fake SOPs? And we haven't seen the same level of commitment coming from GCOM with regards to investigating those persons who allegedly photographed their ballots. When this is something that happened first, or when the members of the legislative forces went to vote and happened again today, why not that same level of commitment to having these issues investigated?
Thank you for your final question, Svetlana. And again, it's not the DCO, that was a statement from GCOM. from GCOM. And so you placed him in a difficult spot to respond to that particular question. From GCOM. But I'm sure that it is something that tomorrow, at our next press briefing, we can further interrogate. So since that was Svetlana's final question, I don't see any other questions or hands raised. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, first of all, I would like to take the opportunity as GCOM's Public Relations Officer to thank you for your cooperation and support in the fields today. You've been wonderful in your coverage, and I look forward to the same kind of support as we continue to cover these elections to the point of a declaration. It would also be very remiss of me to conclude this press briefing this evening, not to, on behalf of the Commission, the CEO, and our entire operations team, to congratulate the people of Guyana who participated in this democratic process for being part of this very important exercise and a good day that we had in the voting process. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you more at this media center as we continue to engage over the coming days. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant evening.